On the 1st of August 2014, a 20-year-old woman was working as a lifeguard at a community pool in the area of Yarling Court in West Falls Church, Virginia. It was 7 p.m. and no one was around. She was at the counter when a clean-shaven man in his 30s approached her and struck up a conversation. He suddenly pulled out a gun on her and started bounding her hands together using zip ties. He then injected her with a strong sedative called ketamine, putting her into a trance-like state. He then proceeded to defile her. After the attack, he fled the scene and the authorities were contacted. He was described as a white male of average build and approximately 5'10" tall. She was admitted to the local hospital for evaluation and released. Evidence was collected from the crime scene and it was submitted for forensic analysis. The results showed the presence of ketamine as well as the suspect's DNA. Detectives investigated the case thoroughly and continued to do so throughout the years. 2 years after the 2014 attack, a similar incident occurred. At 12:30 p.m. on the 3rd of September 2016, a 24-year-old Bulgarian woman who was on a temporary working visa and was on a break from medical school overseas. She was working at a pool at 200 block South Pickett Street in Alexandria, Virginia. The day was cool and cloudy, and the pool was deserted when a man showed up, asking if he left his flip-flops there from the day before. They began looking around together, going back to the pool's pump room, where lost and found items were stored, but nothing was found. He left, but later returned at 1 p.m. asking her to look again. They went back into the pump room, and when she turned around to tell him that the shoes weren't there, the man pointed a gun at her face. The victim screamed, and the man told her, "Stop screaming, I'll shoot you in the mouth." He told her to get on her knees. He zip-tied her hands together and put tissues in her mouth, and he put blue latex gloves on. The man explained what he was going to do to her, and that if she didn't comply, he would end her life. He ordered her not to look at him, and to keep quiet, and to keep her eyes shut. He proceeded to remove parts of her clothing, while inappropriately touching and kissing her body. He applied pressure around her neck and bashed her in the head and proceeded to indecently assault her. He then fled from the scene on foot. After the assailant fled the scene, she was able to get out of the room 5 minutes later. She somehow managed to call her boyfriend, who contacted the police. The first officer to arrive at the scene found her half-dressed, with her hands zip-tied, turning blue from the pressure. She was transported to Fairfax Inova Hospital for medical attention. She had suffered multiple bruising, abrasions, and internal injuries. DNA of the assailant was collected from her body. The bodily fluid was used to try and identify the suspect, but it didn't have a hit in the CODIS database. Then Parabon became involved and analysed the DNA using genetic genealogy. Parabon investigators used a public genealogy website to search for relatives. Using the list of relatives and the strength of the relationship, Parabon narrowed the search down to 39-year-old Arlington resident Jesse Bjerke as a strong suspect. Detectives began watching Bjerke closely. They collected abandoned trash outside of his house, as well as straws that he left at a restaurant. These both matched the DNA collected from the crime scenes, and Bjerke was arrested on the 12th of February 2019. Just prior to his arrest, he told his employers and landlord that he was planning to leave the area and become a travelling nurse. After his arrest, his employment records were subpoenaed from the Alexandria Nova Hospital, where he'd initially worked as an emergency medical technician. This is where he stole the ketamine from. He later worked as an emergency room nurse. The records show that he unexpectedly left work at 8:30 a.m. on the day of the 2016 assault, just an hour and a half into his shift, claiming to be sick. Cell phone records show pings from nearby cell towers, providing further evidence to police that Bjerke was in the area of the pool on the day of the crime. On Friday, the 2nd of October 2020, Bjerke was sentenced to 65 years in jail.
On the 19th of December, 1979, Michelle Martinko was an 18-year-old Cedar Rapids resident in Iowa and a senior at Cedar Rapids Kennedy High School. She was a quiet blonde girl that loved music. She excelled in the classroom and was a talented performer. She managed to make it into the twirling squad, where she twirled her baton during halftime shows at football games. She also sang in choirs and performed in theater productions. She aspired to study interior design after completing high school. That evening, after attending a choir banquet at the downtown Sheraton Hotel, Martinko headed to Westdale Mall, which had opened less than 2 weeks prior. At the event, she wore a black jersey dress, black scarf, black tights and heels, and a waist-length white and brown rabbit fur jacket, and she carried a brown leather purse. She had $180 on her and was shopping for a new winter coat. She asked her close friend and fellow twirler Jane Hansen if she'd like to join, but Hansen declined, as she had some homework to catch up on. Once she arrived there, she browsed the shops and spoke with friends and other people she knew who worked there. She was last seen at 8 or 9 p.m. outside of a jewelry store in the mall. At 2 a.m., Martinko still hadn't returned home. Her father became concerned, so he contacted the police and reported her missing. 2 hours later, police found the tan and green 1972 Buick Electra family car Martinko had been driving in the northeast corner of the mall parking lot by a JCPenney. An officer noticed the back driver's side door unlocked, and he looked inside and made a horrifying discovery. He noticed Martinko's lifeless body inside. She was lying partially slumped down in the front passenger side seat and had been repeatedly stabbed, and her eyes were still open. Her attacker had stabbed her a total of 29 times in the face, neck, and chest. One stab went through her sternum area, hitting the aorta region of her heart. Her bodily fluid was mostly contained within the car, indicating that the perpetrator took her life while she was in the car. She incurred defensive wounds on her hands while she tried defending herself. It was estimated she was attacked between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. It was thought that the nature of the attack was so brutal that the offender cut himself in the process, also spilling his DNA within the car. There were no fingerprints left behind by the perpetrator, indicating that gloves were worn, and no weapons were left at the scene. Brown shopping bags were also found in the car. Martinko was fully clothed, and a purse under her body still had money in it. Most of the stabs were to the face. Because of these reasons, the investigators believed the attack was personal in nature. Evidence at the crime scene was collected, including the black dress she wore. Within days of attack, police received more than 200 phone calls and letters from people who wanted to help that were outraged by the attack. Hundreds of people were interviewed and countless leads were followed. On the 19th of June, 1980, police released a composite sketch of the suspect composed from 2 witnesses who were questioned under hypnosis. The sketch indicated a white man in his late teens or early 20s, weighing between 165 and 175 pounds, and standing approximately 6 feet tall. During the initial investigation, detectives completed a list of more than 80 potential suspects. More than 60 were tested and cleared. In 2006, investigators re-examined the evidence and found DNA from an unknown offender in the Buick's gear shift in the back of Martinko's dress. It was theorized that the suspect spilled his DNA from the injuries he incurred during the attack. That, as he stabbed over and over, the weapon became slippery, causing him to cut himself through his gloves. The evidence was sent to a crime lab, and the DNA recovered was complete enough to form a profile, which was then uploaded to CODIS database. There were no hits, though. In May of 2017, investigators later sought the services of Parabon, a company that specializes in DNA phenotyping, which is the process of predicting the physical appearance and ancestry of a person from unidentified DNA evidence. Parabon generated photorealistic illustrations of the suspect who took Martinko's life using the 2006 DNA profile. It was a white male with blonde hair and blue eyes, which looked vastly different to the original 1980 sketch composite. The images estimated the man's appearance in 1979, as well as 2017. A former classmate of Martinko said the face looked like another one of their classmates. However, that classmate was investigated and cleared on the DNA buccal swab from several years earlier. More than 100 tips were received following the release of these images. In 2018, the DNA data collected in 2017 was entered into a public GED-matched genealogy website, which narrowed the suspects down to a set of 3 brothers who had grown up in Manchester, Iowa. The brothers were placed under surveillance, and investigators began to attempt to secretly collect their DNA. 2 of the brothers were cleared. However, on the 29th of October, 2018, an investigator saw Jerry Lynn Burns drink sodas out of a plastic glass with a clear straw. He retrieved it after Burns left it behind. An analyst at the state crime lab said DNA from the straw matched DNA found on Martinko's dress. Police executed a search warrant and found a computer search history that included blonde females, indecent assaults, strangulation, and taking people's lives. Burns was arrested on December 19, 2018. At the time of his arrest, Burns had been living in Manchester, a town of about 5,000 people, 45 minutes north of Cedar Rapids. Burns, who would have been 25 at the time of taking Martinko's life, said he could not offer a plausible explanation for why his DNA was found at the crime scene. Authorities said at the time of his arrest. On the 7th of August, 2020, Burns was sentenced to life in prison without parole.
On the 19th of January 2012, 54-year-old Hugh Timothy Blanton and 65-year-old Ronald Sylvia were lovers that lived in a motorhome in the now closed Seahorse Recreational Vehicle Park on Big Pine in the Florida Keys. On this day, witnesses and neighbours heard the 2 men arguing over a photo of Brandon's private parts. Sylvia had shared the images in the community around the campground where they lived. Blanton was so upset that he beat and strangled the life out of Sylvia. He then set fire to Sylvia's genitals, causing the motorhome to burn out with him inside. Blanton then left the area. Investigators arrived at the scene and collected evidence. Blanton was questioned about a month later when Broward County deputies arrested him for hitchhiking and questioned him about Sylvia. Blanton admitted to being angry with Sylvia about the picture, but said they were in a platonic relationship and said that Sylvia was alive when he left. Neighbours told detectives they suspected the 2 were romantically involved. He also admitted to using Sylvia's cell phone after the fire. He had 2 phones with him when he was booked into the Broward County Jail on an unrelated charge when he was extradited to Massachusetts. Both cell phones were thrown away and never recovered at a detention centre in that state. Blanton later served a 13-month jail sentence in Volusia County after he was convicted in a 2017 attack that started with an argument over running out of beer. He had been drinking all day, but when there was no beers left, he shoved a woman, causing her to fall into a heater, and then proceeded to stab a man with a 2-pronged cooking fork. He started serving his sentence in July of 2018 and was released in August of 2019. The case went cold until May of 2020 when detectives re-examined the case after a parole violation by Blanton, and he was placed into the Volusia prison. Blanton's DNA was collected at the time and later tested against the DNA found under Sylvia's fingernails, and a match was found. Having been released from jail since, Blanton was again arrested on the 9th of October 2020 by Daytona Beach Police and placed into the Volusia County Jail for taking Sylvia's life, as well as arson charges. When questioned this time about Sylvia, Blanton denied ever knowing him or ever been in the Florida Keys area. He's been held without bond and is expected to be returned to the Florida Keys area for the trial.